I still remember the day he threw the dinner plate against the wall and said he regretted marrying me. That was the night I realized the man I loved had never really existed. Hello, my dears. My name is Dorothy Wilson. I'm 83 years old, and today I'm going to share a story I've kept deep in my heart for many years. A story of pain, but also of tremendous resilience. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me continue sharing my experiences with you all. And please tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing my words reach so many different places. I was born in Millerville, a small town in rural Virginia, in 1942. We were a simple but honest family. My father, Mr. Henry, had a small grocery store on the main street. My mother, Helen, supplemented our income by sewing for the wealthier families in town. I grew up learning that work brings dignity, honesty is priceless, and family is the most precious thing we have in this life. Our house was small, but always very clean and organized. I remember the smell of fresh coffee every morning and the sound of my mother's sewing machine, which often lulled me to sleep. We didn't have luxuries, but we never lacked the essentials. And we had something no money can buy: respect for each other. I had only one sister, Beatrice, 2 years younger than me. Oh, Beatrice! Since childhood, she turned heads wherever she went. She had golden hair and green eyes, inherited from our Scottish grandmother. Meanwhile, I took after my father's side of the family, with dark hair and olive skin. I wasn't ugly, but I was never the type of girl who took men's breath away when she entered a room. At school, I stood out for my intelligence. I was dedicated, got good grades, and dreamed of becoming a teacher. Beatrice, on the other hand, wasn't very interested in studying. She knew her beauty would open doors that books might not open so easily. I don't blame her for that. That was the world we lived in during the 50s and 60s. Beautiful women married well. Others had to secure their livelihoods in other ways. At 16, I started helping my father at the grocery store in the afternoons after school. That's where I met various people from town, including the Harrison family. Mr. William Harrison owned the largest dairy factory in the region. They were considered the elite of Millerville. When they came to the grocery store, it was always for small purchases, things they had forgotten to order from their private supplier. But even in these small purchases, they made sure to show they were different, better. Mrs. Evelyn Harrison, William's wife, always entered wearing gloves, even in the scorching summer heat. She spoke little, only what was necessary, and almost never looked in the eyes of people she considered inferior. They had an only son, James, who was studying business administration in New York City and only came home for holidays and school vacations. I had never paid much attention to him until the 4th of July celebration in 1959. I was 19, and for the first time, my parents had allowed me to go to the celebration in the town square with some friends. I wore a simple dress, sewn by my mother, but one I thought was very pretty. It had small flowers embroidered on the neckline and hem. I remember spending the entire afternoon curling my hair with rollers. At the celebration, people danced happily around the square. The smell of hot dogs, apple pie, and corn on the cob filled the air. Colorful banners swayed with the gentle breeze of that July night. I was happy, carefree, feeling for the first time the taste of freedom. That's when I noticed a young man watching me from across the square, tall, with dark hair combed back and a suit that clearly cost more than all the furniture in my house combined. It was James Harrison. Our eyes met, and to my surprise, he smiled. A smile that made my heart race in a way it never had before. That night, against all expectations, James came to talk to me. We talked for hours about books, music, dreams. He had just returned from New York, graduated in business administration, and spoke enthusiastically about plans to modernize his father's factory. He spoke in a way that made me feel special, as if each of my words was important, as if my opinions about the world had value. "You're different from the other girls, Dorothy," he told me. "There's something in your eyes, an intelligence, a depth that fascinates me." It was the first time someone had seen beyond my simple appearance. The first time I felt truly seen. In the months that followed, we met in secret. I told my parents I was studying at a friend's house, and James invented business meetings to justify his outings. We would meet in the small garden behind the Methodist church, where no one usually went during the week. There, among the flowers and silence, our love grew. I knew it was an impossible love. His family would never accept a daughter-in-law of humble origin, the daughter of a simple shopkeeper. And I was aware that I was deluding myself, believing in a fairy tale that could not have a happy ending. But at 19, the heart speaks louder than reason. It was on an October afternoon, with dry leaves falling around us, that James took me by surprise. "I want to marry you, Dorothy," he said, holding my hands in his. "I don't care what my parents will say. I don't care about anything but having you by my side for the rest of my life." My legs trembled, my voice disappeared. What I considered impossible was within my reach. "But your family will never accept it," I managed to stammer. "Let me handle them," James replied with that confidence that only privilege can give. "My father needs me to run the factory. He'll understand that's the condition." And so it was. A week later, James appeared at my father's grocery store, not as a customer, but as a suitor. Formally dressed, with a bouquet of roses in hand, he asked permission to officially court me. My father was speechless. My mother dropped the dish towel she was holding. The news spread through the town like wildfire. Henry's eldest daughter had won the heart of the Harrison heir. It was as if a miracle had happened in Millerville. The reactions were diverse. Some people were genuinely happy for me. Others, driven by envy, spread rumors that I must be pregnant, that I had set some kind of trap. My sister Beatrice surprised me the most. While everyone expected her to die of jealousy, she hugged me tightly and said she was happy for me. Her eyes, however, told a different story. There was something cold and calculating in that look that I would only understand much later. James's family reacted exactly as I expected. Mr. Harrison was furious, threatening to disinherit his son. Mrs. Harrison had a nervous attack that left her bedridden for 3 days. But James stood firm. Either they accepted his marriage to me, or he would abandon the family business and go work for their biggest competitor. It was a bluff, of course. James would never abandon the life of comfort and privilege he was accustomed to. But his parents didn't want to risk it. After weeks of tension, they gave in with one condition. The wedding had to be grand, befitting the Harrison name. It couldn't appear that their son was marrying in secrecy, as if he were ashamed. And so began the preparations for what would be the biggest wedding Millerville had ever seen. I felt like I was living in a dream. Suddenly, I was being taken to the best stores in New York City to choose my wedding dress, visiting jewelers to select rings, being introduced to important people as the future Mrs. Harrison. My mother tried to keep me grounded. "Don't get carried away, my daughter," she would say, as she helped me try on the wedding dress that cost more than our house. "Always remember who you are, where you came from. Money changes people's lives, but not always for the better." I listened, nodded in agreement, but deep down I thought she was being pessimistic. How could something so perfect go wrong? I was in love. I was going to marry the man of my dreams. I would have a life of comfort that my parents could never provide me. What could go wrong? The wedding took place in January 1960 at the Methodist Church in Millerville, all decorated with white orchids brought especially for the occasion. My dress, designed by a famous New York designer, had a 10-foot train and a French lace veil. Harrison family heirloom jewels adorned my neck and ears. I looked like a princess from a fairy tale. The reception was at the country club, decorated like a palace to receive the 500 guests, many of whom I had never seen in my life. Politicians, businessmen, influential people from various parts of the state, all wanting to see up close the simple girl who had won the heart of young Harrison. Amidst that crowd of strangers, I felt alone. My parents and my sister seemed out of place, embarrassed by so much luxury. James circulated among the important guests, introducing me like a newly acquired trophy. His smile didn't reach his eyes like in our secret meetings in the church garden. It was at that moment, amid the sound of the orchestra and the clinking of crystal glasses, that I felt the first tightness in my heart, the first sign that perhaps I had made a mistake. But I pushed that thought away. It was just the nervousness of the big day, I convinced myself. Everything would be fine when we were alone, when we started our life together. Our honeymoon was in Paris. I, who had never left Millerville, was suddenly crossing the ocean on a plane, staying in a luxury hotel with a view of the Eiffel Tower. It was all so surreal that sometimes I pinched myself to make sure I wasn't dreaming. James was attentive, affectionate, exactly as he had been during our courtship. We walked hand in hand through the streets of Paris, visited museums, dined in fine restaurants. At night, in his arms, I felt like the happiest woman in the world. But reality began to set in when we returned to the United States. The house where we went to live wasn't ours, but a property of James's parents, an imposing mansion on the outskirts of Millerville with 7 bedrooms, a music room, library, swimming pool, and a garden that required 3 gardeners to maintain. The house came with a staff, cook, maids, driver, gardeners. They all had worked for the Harrison family for years and reported not to me, but to Mrs. Harrison, who made a point of appearing every day to check if everything was in order. I, who grew up helping my mother with household chores, suddenly had nothing to do. I couldn't enter the kitchen because it would offend the cook. I couldn't make my own bed because it was the maid's job. I couldn't even choose what we would eat for dinner because the week's menu had already been determined by my mother-in-law. James spent more and more time at the factory, leaving before dawn and returning late at night, often after I was already asleep. When I complained about the loneliness, he looked at me with surprise. "But you have everything you've ever wanted, Dorothy. A beautiful house, servants, jewels, designer clothes. What more could a woman want?" It was the first time I realized he had never really understood me. He had never listened when I talked about my dreams of being a teacher, of making a difference in children's lives, of being more than just a wife. Gradually, I became a stranger to myself. Dorothy, the dreamer, intelligent and full of plans, gave way to an empty shell, a well-dressed doll who smiled at social events and said only what was expected of her. When we completed a year of marriage, the pressure for a child began. At first, there were just insinuations. My mother-in-law asking if I wasn't feeling well, if I didn't have news to share. Then came the direct questions from James. "When are we going to have our heir, Dorothy? The Harrison family needs a boy to continue the business." As if a child's value lay only in his ability to inherit the dairy factory. As if a girl wouldn't be welcome. As if I were a machine programmed to produce on demand. Months passed and the pregnancy didn't come. I began to be taken from doctor to doctor. Invasive exams, painful treatments, miracle teas prescribed by healers, prayers, promises to saints. Nothing worked. With each month that passed without me getting pregnant, James became more distant, colder. Our moments of intimacy, once driven by love and desire, became mechanical, an obligation fulfilled with the sole purpose of producing an heir. My mother-in-law began bringing candidates to meet her son. Young women from good families who appeared at our house for lunches and dinners. Always young, always beautiful, always fertile, as she made a point of emphasizing, mentioning how many nephews they had, how many brothers, how in their families women always gave birth easily. I smiled and served tea, pretending not to understand the indirect messages. Inside, I died a little each day. When we completed 3 years of marriage, everything fell apart completely. It was a Sunday, lunch day at my in-laws' house. The whole family gathered, including my parents and my sister Beatrice, who now worked as a secretary at the Harrison factory, a job that James had provided at my request in one of the rare moments when he still seemed to care about my feelings. Lunch was proceeding as always, superficial conversations, compliments on the food, discussions about politics and business from which women were politely excluded. I was drinking more wine than usual, trying to endure those hours of social torture. When I got up to help serve dessert, my hand trembled, and a few drops of wine fell on the white linen tablecloth. A family heirloom that my mother-in-law proudly displayed. A small accident, something that in a normal family would be cause for laughter at most, but not in the Harrison family. Silence fell over the table like a sentence. All eyes turned to me, some with pity, others with barely disguised contempt. My mother-in-law let out a dramatic sigh, as if I had committed an unforgivable crime. It was then that James, the man who had once told me he loved me more than anything in the world, threw his napkin on the table and exploded. Besides not being a proper wife, she's clumsy too. You're useless. If you don't give me a child by the end of the year, I'll marry your sister. Time stopped. The air became heavy, unbreathable. I looked around the table, searching for a friendly face, someone who would be outraged by those cruel words. But what I saw were lowered gazes, averted, some even with a gleam of barely disguised satisfaction, like my mother-in-law's, who nodded slightly as if her son had finally taken the action she had been waiting for. My parents seemed to have aged 10 years in that instant. My father, always so strong and determined, now looked small, shrunk by the humiliation of seeing his daughter treated like a defective object. My mother cried silently, tears streaming down her wrinkled face without making any movement to dry them. And Beatrice, my sister, my only sister. She didn't seem shocked or outraged. For a brief moment, I saw a smile form at the corner of her lips before she assumed an expression of false dismay. At that moment, something broke inside me, something that would never be repaired. It was as if I were observing the scene from outside my body, seeing that woman, me, being humiliated in front of everyone I knew and loved, unable to defend herself. But I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't run away like a dramatic heroine from a soap opera. I got up calmly, picked up the napkin that had fallen to the floor, cleaned the small wine stain from the white tablecloth, and said, in a voice that didn't seem like mine, "Dessert is served. It's apple pie, the house specialty." And I continued serving each of those present as if nothing had happened, as if my husband hadn't just destroyed me with words sharper than any knife. That night was the longest of my life. We returned home in absolute silence. James locked himself in his office with a bottle of whiskey. I went to our bedroom, which had long since ceased to be the place of love it once was, and lay staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the paint, trying to decide what to do with the pieces of my life, whether to stay and continue dying slowly or leave and risk everything for a chance to live. That night, I made my decision, and it was this decision that completely changed the course of my story. But that, my dears, is a subject for our next meeting. Don't forget to follow me to find out what happened after that night, how I faced the most painful betrayal, and how I managed to rebuild my life from scratch, finding strength where there was only weakness and despair. And if this story is touching your heart, please share it with someone who might need to hear that there is always a new dawn, even after the darkest night. After that fateful Sunday, when James humiliated me in front of the entire family, something within me changed forever. I woke up the next morning with a clarity I had never felt before. The sun came through the bedroom window, illuminating the luxury that surrounded me, the expensive furniture, the imported silk curtains, the Venetian mirror, and for the first time I clearly saw the golden cage in which I lived. James had already left for the factory, as he always did before dawn. The house was silent, except for the distant noise of the cook preparing breakfast that I would barely be able to eat. I got up, put on a simple dress, one of the few I had chosen myself without my mother-in-law's interference, and decided I needed to breathe, to think. I went out to walk through the mansion's gardens, something I rarely did. It was early 1963, and summer punished Millerville with its relentless heat. The garden flowers, carefully cultivated by the gardeners, displayed vibrant colors that contrasted with the gray that had taken over my soul. It was during this walk that I decided to investigate what my heart had already suspected for months. The frequent visits of Beatrice to the factory, the looks exchanged between her and James during family lunches, the way he always found time to resolve issues related to her work, while he could barely dine with me once a week. That same afternoon, I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that James had once complimented. I pinned my hair in an elegant bun and asked the driver to take me to the factory. I said I wanted to surprise my husband, perhaps invite him to a special lunch. The driver seemed uncomfortable with the request, avoiding my gaze in the rearview mirror. "Are you sure, ma'am? Mr. Harrison usually gets irritated when he's interrupted during business hours." I insisted with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I'm sure he'll make an exception for his wife." The path to the factory never seemed so long. Each curve in the road seemed to take me closer to a truth I feared but needed to face. The dairy farms passed by the car window, and I wondered if working milking cows with my own hands would be better than living a lie in an air-conditioned mansion. When we arrived at the factory, I asked the driver to wait for me and entered alone. I knew the way to James's office. I had been there a few times at the beginning of our marriage when he still made a point of proudly showing me the family business. The receptionist widened her eyes when she saw me, rising hastily. "Mrs. Harrison, we weren't expecting you today." "It's a surprise," I replied with studied calmness. "Is my husband in his office?" She hesitated, nervously fidgeting with some papers on her desk. "Mr. Harrison is in an important meeting." He asked not to be interrupted. "I understand." I paused briefly. "Is my sister Beatrice also in a meeting?" I asked, observing how the receptionist's face paled. "Miss Beatrice is assisting Mr. Harrison in the meeting," she stammered, unable to hold my gaze. I thanked her with a nod and walked determinedly through the factory corridors, ignoring the receptionist's calls. The employees who crossed my path lowered their eyes, some murmuring respectful greetings, others simply turning away as if I were invisible. I wondered how many of them knew for how long the farce of my marriage had been the subject of whispered conversations in the corners of the factory. James's office was at the end of a long corridor, isolated from the others to ensure privacy. The heavy dark wood door was closed but not locked. For a moment, I hesitated, my hand suspended in the air, ready to knock. Part of me wanted to turn around, go back home, continue pretending I didn't know anything. It would be easier, safer. But the other part, the one that had awakened after Sunday's humiliation, demanded the truth. I didn't knock. I silently turned the doorknob and opened the door. What I saw in that room will be etched in my memory until the day I leave this world. My husband sitting in his leather armchair and my sister leaning over him in a way that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Work papers scattered across the desk were just a disguise for what really happened in those meetings. They didn't see me immediately. It was the sound of my wedding ring hitting against the doorknob that made Beatrice turn her face in my direction. The shock in her eyes quickly gave way to something that chilled my soul. It wasn't guilt or shame. It was anger at being interrupted. James composed himself more quickly, adjusting his tie and assuming that arrogant expression I had learned to hate. "What are you doing here, Dorothy? You know I don't like to be interrupted during work." The audacity of those words, as if I were the intruder, the one in the wrong, ignited something inside me. A courage I didn't know I possessed. "Work?" My voice came out firmer than I expected. "Is that what you call this now?" Beatrice moved away from him, smoothing her crumpled dress. Her face was flushed, but not from shame. "Sister, it's not what you're thinking." "Don't call me sister," I cut in, feeling each word like a blade. "Sisters don't do what you're doing." James stood up, coming around the desk with that confidence of someone who always gets what he wants, who has never faced real consequences for his actions. "Dorothy, you're being hysterical. Beatrice was just helping me with some documents. Go home, we'll talk later." I looked from one to the other, clearly seeing the lie, the contempt, the certainty that I would accept any explanation to keep up appearances, to continue being Mrs. Harrison. "There won't be a later, James," I said simply, removing the ring from my finger and placing it on the desk. "It's over. I turned to leave, but he grabbed my arm forcefully, his fingers leaving marks on my skin. "You're not going anywhere. You're my wife, remember? Till death do us part. That's what you promised before God and the entire town." Beatrice remained standing, observing the scene with an expression that mixed triumph and concern. Not for my well-being, but for the possibility of a scandal that would tarnish her reputation, that would ruin her plans. "Let me go," I demanded, trying to pull my arm away, "or I'll scream so loudly that all the employees will come to see how the respectable James Harrison treats his wife." His expression changed. I saw the hatred in his eyes, something I had never noticed before. With a sudden movement, he pushed me against the wall. My head hit hard, and for a moment, everything went dark. "You are nothing without me, Dorothy," he hissed, his face so close to mine I could smell his coffee and cigarette breath. "Nothing. You'll go back to your father's grocery store, to that tiny house, to being pointed at in the street as the woman who couldn't keep her husband." Each word was a blow, but I was already too hurt to feel more pain. "I'd rather go back to nothing than continue living this lie," I replied with a calmness that disconcerted him. He released me, running his hand through his impeccably combed hair. "Do as you wish, but know that if you walk out that door, you take nothing, not even the clothes on your back. Everything you have was bought with my money." Beatrice finally spoke up, taking a step forward. "Dorothy, be reasonable. You have a life many women envy. A beautiful house, servants, jewels. Why throw it all away over a misunderstanding?" I looked at my sister as if seeing her for the first time. The girl with whom I shared my childhood, with whom I played with dolls, whom I taught to read and write, for whom I would have given my life if necessary. That girl no longer existed. In her place was a calculating woman, willing to betray her own sister for money and status. "It's not a misunderstanding, Beatrice. It's betrayal, his and yours." I turned to James. "And you're right. Everything I have was bought with your money, including my dignity, but that ends today." I left the office with my head held high, ignoring the curious looks from the employees, who had certainly heard part of the argument. The driver was waiting for me in the car, pretending not to notice my altered state, the bruise that was beginning to form on my temple, the watery eyes that I refused to let overflow. "Home, ma'am?" he asked. "No," I replied, making a decision that would change the course of my life. "To the bus station, please." The driver hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Are you sure, ma'am? Mr. Harrison—" "Mr. Harrison is no longer my husband," I interrupted. "And I am no longer Mrs. Harrison. I'm just Dorothy, and I need to go to the bus station." He nodded silently and started the car. During the journey, I looked for the last time at the streets of Millerville, the town where I was born, grew up, and thought I would build my life. I passed by my father's grocery store, saw him serving a customer with that gentle smile that was his trademark. I thought about stopping, saying goodbye, explaining, but there was no time. James would come after me, not out of love, but out of wounded pride, out of fear of scandal. At the bus station, I thanked the driver, a simple man who was just following orders, but who looked at me with a silent compassion that was worth more than 1,000 words. I took the first bus that would leave town without caring where it was going. I just needed to be far away. Sitting on that old bus, in my fine dress that would soon be of no use to me, I realized I had only my purse with me, with little money and no documents other than my ID card. I had left behind clothes, jewels, memories, but I had also left behind fear, submission, the shame of not being what others expected of me. The bus departed, raising dust on the dirt road. I looked out the window and saw in the distance the silhouette of the Harrison factory against the orange sunset sky. For a moment, I felt a tightness in my chest, not from regret, but from the acute perception that I was completely alone in the world. That bus was headed to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a city I had never visited, where I knew no one, or almost no one. I remembered Aunt Martha, my maternal grandmother's sister, who had moved there many years ago after becoming a widow. My mother maintained sporadic correspondence with her, and I knew only that she lived in a simple house near St. Paul's Cathedral. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a place to spend the first night, to breathe and think about the next step. During the journey, which lasted all night, I oscillated between moments of absolute panic. What had I done? How would I survive? And a strange sense of freedom I had never experienced before. I arrived in Pittsburgh the following morning, exhausted, hungry, my body aching from the journey in an uncomfortable bus seat. The city, with its steel mills and industrial landscape, seemed a world apart from Millerville. Hurried people crossed the streets, merchants opened their shops. The smell of fresh bread came from a nearby bakery. I asked an elderly lady where St. Paul's Cathedral was, and she pointed to a hill not too far away. "It's up that slope, dear. You can't miss it. The most beautiful in the city." I thanked her and began to climb the steep hill, feeling the morning sun warming my back. Each step was an effort, not just from physical fatigue, but from the weight of the decisions I had made in the last 24 hours. The cathedral was truly impressive, with its elaborate facade and towers that seemed to touch the sky. I sat on a bench in the square in front, trying to organize my thoughts. How would I find Aunt Martha? The city wasn't small, but it wasn't so large that everyone would know each other. That's when I noticed a lady leaving the cathedral, carrying a basket with flowers. Something about her movements, the way she adjusted the scarf on her head, reminded me of my grandmother. I approached timidly. "Excuse me, ma'am. By any chance, do you know Martha Wilson?" The lady looked at me with curiosity. "Martha. Yes, I know her. She lives 2 blocks from here in a yellow house with blue windows. She's my neighbor." "Why? Are you related to her?" "I'm her grandniece," I replied, feeling immense relief at this small miracle. "I came from Millerville to visit her, but I don't have the exact address." The lady smiled. "Come, I'll take you there. Martha will be happy with the visit. She lives so alone, poor thing." We walked together through the narrow streets until we reached the yellow house with blue windows. A simple, well-kept construction with a small garden in front where herbs and colorful flowers grew. The lady knocked on the door, calling out, "Martha, Martha, you have a visitor." Moments later, the door opened and a thin woman appeared with white hair tied in a bun, wearing a cotton house dress. Her eyes, the same brown shade as mine, widened in surprise. "Lord have mercy, if it isn't the spitting image of Helen when she was young," she exclaimed, bringing her hands to her face. "You must be her daughter, Dorothy or Beatrice?" "Dorothy," I replied, feeling tears finally overcoming the barrier I had erected. "I'm Dorothy, Aunt Martha." She hugged me with surprising strength for someone so frail. She smelled of rosemary and lavender, a scent that instantly reminded me of my childhood, of afternoons spent in my grandmother's backyard. Come in," she said, pulling me inside the house. "You must be tired from the journey. I'll prepare some coffee for us." As she moved about the small kitchen, I looked around. The house was simple but welcoming. Well-preserved old furniture, lace curtains on the windows, a Catholic shrine in a corner of the living room. Nothing there resembled the opulence of the Harrison mansion, but there was something much more valuable: peace. When the coffee was served, Aunt Martha sat across from me and asked simply, "What happened, my child?" And for the first time since I left Millerville, I allowed myself to cry. I cried for all the humiliations, for all the lonely nights, for the dream of love that had turned into a nightmare. I cried for my husband's betrayal, for my sister's betrayal, for the loss of my identity. Aunt Martha listened in silence, holding my hands in hers, offering the comfort of her presence, of her unconditional acceptance. When I finished telling my story, exhausted and relieved at the same time, she said only, "You did the right thing, Dorothy, and you can stay here for as long as you need. This house is small, but the heart that inhabits it is big." That night, lying in a narrow bed in the guest room, covered by a handmade quilt, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. I didn't know what the future held for me, but I knew that, for the first time in years, that future would be written by me. Not by James, not by the Harrisons, not by the social conventions that imprisoned me. I placed my hand on my stomach, feeling a slight nausea that had been accompanying me for a few days and that I had attributed to stress. And then, like a flash, came the realization my period was late. I, who had tried so hard to get pregnant during my marriage, who had been humiliated and called barren, possibly carried a life inside me. Destiny, in its infinite irony, had chosen this moment, when I was finally freeing myself from James, to grant me the child he had so desired. I smiled in the dark, a smile mixed with tears. If it were true, if I really was pregnant, this child would be my chance to start over, to build a family based on true love, not appearances. I fell asleep with this possibility warming my heart, not knowing that the challenges I would face in the coming months would test every ounce of my strength and determination, but also not knowing that these same challenges would reveal a Dorothy that even I didn't know. A woman capable of facing storms and emerging from them not just a survivor, but transformed. That first night at Aunt Martha's house marked the beginning of a journey I could never have imagined. The suspicion of pregnancy was confirmed 2 weeks later when the local midwife, Mrs. Sarah, a lady with calloused hands and wise eyes, confirmed what my body already knew. "You're expecting a baby, girl. I'd say about 2 months along, judging by the size of your belly." The world stopped for a moment. 2 months. The child James had demanded so much existed. It was there, growing inside me, just when I had decided to cut all ties with him. I laughed and cried at the same time while Aunt Martha held my hands firmly. "It's a gift, Dorothy," she said, with that wisdom that only women who have lived a lot possess. "A new life to accompany your fresh start." In the days that followed, I was overcome by contradictory feelings. Joy for the baby I had always wanted, fear of the uncertain future that awaited us, anger at the thought that James had rights over that child, guilt for having fled without even saying goodbye to my parents. It was Aunt Martha who suggested I write to my mother. "Don't tell her where you are, at least not for now. Just say that you're well, that you're safe. A mother doesn't sleep until she knows if her child is alive or dead." I followed her advice. I wrote a brief letter, telling only that I had left James, that I was sheltered in a distant relative's house, and that when it was safe, I would contact her again. Nothing about the pregnancy, nothing about the address. Aunt Martha sent the letter from a neighboring town to make it difficult for anyone trying to locate me. The month of April 1963 passed slowly. My body began to show the first signs of pregnancy. Morning sickness that left me exhausted, sore breasts, a hunger that alternated with complete repulsion for certain foods. Aunt Martha took care of me with a mother's dedication, preparing teas to ease the discomfort, ensuring I ate well even on difficult days. Life in the small house with blue windows had its own rhythm, completely different from the Harrison mansion. Here, there were no servants to do everything. Each meal had to be prepared by our own hands. Each piece of clothing washed and hung on the clothesline in the backyard. Each corner of the house cleaned by ourselves. At first, my delicate hands, unaccustomed to housework, became red and sore. But there was a strange satisfaction in seeing the result of my own effort. The shine of a newly waxed floor, the aroma of bread I had kneaded and baked myself, the clothes impeccably ironed and folded. Aunt Martha noticed my interest in sewing. "Your mother always had fairy hands for embroidery," she commented one afternoon while teaching me how to hem a dress. "I see you inherited her talent." That's how I began to help Aunt Martha with her sewing work. She accepted small jobs from neighbors, a dress to adjust, pants to shorten, buttons to replace. The money was little, but I felt immense pride in contributing, in not being just a burden to her. In May, I received a response from my mother. The letter, hidden inside a recipe book to divert any curiosity, brought news that made my heart tighten. After my escape, James had been furious. He went to my parents' house, demanding to know my whereabouts, threatening them in every possible way. When he realized they really didn't know where I was, he turned his fury against Beatrice. "Your sister lost her job at the factory. my mother wrote, her trembling handwriting revealing her state of nerves. James accused her of planning your escape, of ruining his marriage. Now she's at home, destroyed, repentant. She says she wants your forgiveness, that she committed the worst mistake of her life. Beatrice's remorse didn't move me. The wound of betrayal was still too raw, but I was concerned that my parents were suffering the consequences of my actions. James was a powerful man in Millerville. He could easily ruin my father's small business, turn my parents' lives into hell. At the end of the letter, my mother wrote something that left me in a state of shock. James went to the judge to annul the marriage. He claims you abandoned him without reason, that you did not consummate the marriage because you are incapable of bearing children. Your father and I know this is a lie, but he has influential friends. We are trying to find a lawyer who will agree to help us, but everyone is afraid to confront the Harrisons. Annul the marriage, declare me barren. James didn't just want to get rid of me. He wanted to destroy my reputation, make sure I could never rebuild my life. And the worst part, if he succeeded in getting the annulment, legally, my child would not be a Harrison, would not have the right to the name, the inheritance, the recognition of the father. I showed the letter to Aunt Martha, who read it with a grave expression. We need a lawyer, she concluded, someone who isn't afraid of the Harrisons because he doesn't depend on them. But we don't have money to pay a lawyer, I argued dejectedly. Aunt Martha smiled with that mysterious smile she had when keeping a secret. Maybe we do. There's something I haven't told you, Dorothy, something I've saved for an emergency. She took me to her bedroom and, removing a loose board under the bed, revealed a small carved wooden box. Inside was a set of antique jewelry, a pearl necklace, sapphire earrings, a gold brooch with small diamonds encrusted. They belonged to your great-grandmother, my mother, she explained. The only inheritance I received. I never sold them because, well, I never needed to that badly. But now it's a matter of justice, of protecting you and this child. I tried to protest, but Aunt Martha was inflexible. The next day, she sold the brooch to a jeweler in the city. With the money, we sought out Mr. Anderson, a retired lawyer who had moved to Pittsburgh precisely to escape the political pressures of Washington, D.C. Mr. Anderson was a man in his 60s, completely white-haired and with a posture that inspired confidence. He listened to my story attentively, making occasional notes without showing judgment or disbelief. Your case is complicated, Mrs. Dorothy, he finally said. Your husband has influence, money, and from what you tell me, no scruples. He paused thoughtfully. But he made a crucial mistake. He lied in an official document by claiming the marriage was not consummated. If you are pregnant, we have concrete evidence against him. But he can claim the child isn't his, I argued, expressing my greatest fear. Mr. Anderson nodded. He can, and probably will, but in a paternity test, the truth will come out. Paternity test? I asked, confused. In 1963, this type of test was still something distant from most people's reality. It's a relatively new procedure, but already accepted by courts in exceptional cases. It would be done after the child's birth. Until then, we need to ensure your husband doesn't get the marriage annulment. We left Mr. Anderson's office with a plan. He would send a challenge to the annulment request, informing the judge about my pregnancy and requesting that any decision be postponed until the child's birth. He would also request provisional alimony, based on the fact that pregnant, I could not adequately provide for my own sustenance. In the following weeks, I lived in a constant state of anxiety. Every noise at the door made me startle, fearing James had found me. Every letter that arrived could bring news of the process, of the destiny of my yet unborn child. To occupy my mind and help with expenses, I intensified my work with sewing. Aunt Martha taught me techniques that my mother never had time to show: how to make perfect finishes, how to adjust patterns for different body types, how to create details that transformed a simple piece into something special. I discovered I had a talent for it. My hands, once too delicate for housework, seemed to have been born to hold needles and threads, to transform fabrics into creations that reflected beauty and care. The neighbors began to notice the quality of my work. Soon, it wasn't just small repairs that came to us, but orders for entire dresses, for outfits for special occasions. One satisfied customer brought another, and gradually we formed a small, loyal clientele. June brought the 4th of July, so different from what I knew in Millerville. Here in Pittsburgh, the tradition was even stronger, with parades, special church services, elaborate celebrations in the squares. Aunt Martha insisted I participate, even with my belly already starting to show. "I won't let you hide as if you had committed a crime," she said firmly. "You are a married woman, expecting a child. You have nothing to be ashamed of." Reluctantly, I accepted. Dressed in a typical outfit that disguised my condition, I participated in the celebration in the church square. It was the first time since I left Millerville that I allowed myself to smile without reservations, that I danced as if there were no tomorrow, that I felt part of a community. It was at this celebration that I met Gerald, Mrs. Sarah's nephew. He was a mechanical turner, worked in the small workshop near the train station. A simple man with rough hands and an easy smile, who didn't mind when Aunt Martha introduced me as my grandniece, who is separated from her husband and expecting a baby. Instead of the look of contempt I expected, Gerald just smiled and said, "Then we have to take good care of you and this little one. A child is always a blessing, no matter how they come." That night marked the beginning of a friendship that would be fundamental in the months to come. Gerald became a constant presence in our house, fixing a leaking faucet, helping to install shelves in the room that would be the baby's, bringing fresh fruit from his father's orchard when he knew I was having cravings. There was no romantic interest on my part. The wound left by James was still bleeding. And the last thing I wanted was another man in my life. But Gerald's sincere friendship, his respect for my situation, his willingness to help without asking for anything in return, were balms for my wounded soul. July brought news that again changed the course of my story. Mr. Anderson appeared at our door on a hot afternoon, carrying a folder of documents and an expression that mixed relief and concern. "The judge accepted our challenge, Mrs. Dorothy," he informed us as soon as we sat in the small living room. "The annulment process is suspended until the child's birth, and more, he granted provisional alimony that your husband must pay monthly." I felt immense relief. For the first time since I had fled, I had a legal guarantee, protection against James's manipulations. "But there is another development," continued Mr. Anderson, his tone becoming more serious. "Your husband has hired investigators to find you. They have already been to 3 different cities, showing your photo, asking questions. It's only a matter of time until they get here." My blood froze. The idea of confronting James, of seeing him again, caused me an almost physical terror. I remembered the violence in his eyes during that last confrontation, the way his hands had left marks on my arms. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You have 2 options," replied the lawyer. "You can stay and face him, trusting that justice and truth will prevail. Or you can leave again, go to a place where he won't find you, at least until the baby is born, and the paternity test is done." I looked at Aunt Martha, who was squeezing my hands in hers. I looked at the small living room that had become my refuge, at the garden visible through the window, where I imagined my child playing one day. "I'm not running away again," I decided, feeling a firmness I didn't know I possessed. "I've run once. Enough of living in fear. This is my home now, and no one is going to take me from here." Mr. Anderson smiled as if approving my decision. "In that case, let's prepare. The battle will be difficult, but I'm sure the truth is on your side." That night, sitting on the porch, watching the stars that dotted the winter sky, I felt my baby move for the first time. A light movement, like the flutter of butterfly wings, but unmistakable. I placed my hand on my belly, now clearly visible under the loose dress, and whispered, "We're in this together, little one. You and me against the world if necessary, but we'll win, I promise." The following weeks were of intense preparation. Mr. Anderson gathered witnesses who could attest to James's character, former factory employees who had been unjustly fired, people who knew the backstage of the Harrisons' power. Aunt Martha organized documents, letters, everything that could be useful to prove I hadn't abandoned the home without reason, as James claimed. I continued working on sewing, now with even more dedication. Each completed dress, each satisfied customer was a small victory, proof that I could build something with my own hands, be more than just James Harrison's wife. In August, when my belly was already large enough to force me to adapt my dresses, I received another letter from my mother. This time, the news was even more alarming. "Beatrice has disappeared," she wrote, her trembling handwriting revealing her state of nerves. "She left one night saying she was going to the pharmacy to buy a medicine for a headache and didn't return. The next day, the Harrison factory dawned closed. They say in town that James has also disappeared. There are rumors that they ran away together." I read the letter several times, trying to process that information. James and Beatrice had run away together. My husband and my sister, the two people who had betrayed me the most, now united not only in betrayal, but also in escape. Curiously, I felt neither anger nor sadness, just an immense relief, as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. If James had fled, it meant he wouldn't come after me, that my baby and I would be safe. I showed the letter to Mr. Anderson, who read it with professional interest. "This changes everything," he commented. "If your husband abandoned the town, possibly to escape creditors or legal problems, we have grounds to request divorce on grounds of abandonment. It's him who is abandoning you, not the other way around." Divorce? The word sounded strange on my lips. In 1963, divorce was still not legalized in many states, with complex legal separation proceedings that didn't always dissolve the marriage bond. "Legal separation, technically," corrected the lawyer, "but with the same practical effects for you: freedom to live your life, exclusive custody of your child, right to alimony." That night, I dreamed of an open field, bathed in sunlight. In the dream, I ran freely with a baby in my arms. There were no walls, no fences, no James to tell me what to do, how to live, just the infinite horizon and the promise of better days. I woke up with a smile on my lips and certainty in my heart. The worst had passed. The storm was beginning to move away, and although there were still clouds in the sky, I could glimpse the rainbow forming in the distance. September arrived, bringing spring and more news. Through Mr. Anderson's contacts, we discovered that James had indeed fled the country, probably to Mexico. The dairy factory was on the verge of bankruptcy, sunk in debts he had hidden for years. There were also accusations of tax evasion, document forgery, bribing inspectors. The Harrison empire, built over generations, was collapsing like a house of cards. Mr. Harrison, already elderly and sick, suffered a stroke upon learning of the extent of the problems left by his son. Mrs. Harrison, once so proud and haughty, now walked the streets of Millerville with her head down, facing the accusing looks of those who once feared and respected her. I received this news with a mixture of compassion and a feeling of justice being done. I didn't wish harm on anyone, not even those who had made me suffer. But there was something poetic in the way life had reversed our positions. I, who had left Millerville with nothing but the clothes on my back, was now building, day by day, a new life, honest, based on work and respect. They, who had had everything, lost even their dignity. And so, with a lighter heart and a soul at peace, I entered the last trimester of pregnancy. My baby was growing strong, moving constantly, as if wanting to remind me every moment that I would never be alone again. The last months of 1963 flew by between preparations for the baby's arrival, the sewing work that increased each week, and the news about the separation process. October brought an official letter informing that James had been declared a fugitive from justice, accused of tax and banking fraud. With this, the judge finally granted my legal separation on grounds of abandonment, ensuring exclusive custody of the baby I still carried in my womb. I remember the day Mr. Anderson brought the official documents. I sat in the rocking chair on the porch, caressing my 8-month belly, and read each word with a sense of freedom I had never experienced before. I was no longer Dorothy Harrison. I had returned to being Dorothy Wilson, mistress of my own destiny. "It's a new beginning, little one," I whispered to my baby, who responded with a vigorous kick. For both of us. My parents were finally able to visit me when they found out where I was. The emotion of the reunion was indescribable. My father, always so strong, cried like a child when he hugged me, touching my belly with reverence, as if it were something sacred. "My daughter," he repeated between tears. "My daughter has returned." My mother, more practical as always, came loaded with packages, clothes she had sewn for the baby, homemade sweets she knew I loved, natural remedies to ease the discomfort of the last months of pregnancy. During that visit, I learned more details about James and Beatrice's escape. Apparently, the fraud scheme at the factory was about to be discovered by federal inspectors. James, foreseeing disaster, had planned the escape in advance, transferring money to accounts abroad, selling properties secretly, preparing to disappear. Beatrice, blinded by ambition and perhaps by a distorted feeling she confused with love, agreed to flee with him, abandoning not only our parents but also her own son. Yes, she had given birth to a boy in July, fruit of the relationship with James. The baby remained in the care of my parents, who were now raising their grandson as if he were a son. "You can't imagine the work this boy gives us," commented my mother with that tone that mixed complaint and pride. "He has his father's strong temperament." I couldn't help but notice the irony of the situation. I, who had been humiliated and rejected for not being able to get pregnant, was now expecting a child. Beatrice, who had conquered my husband, abandoned her own son to follow a man who, knowing him well, would certainly abandon her too as soon as a new opportunity arose. But there was no room for resentment in my heart. Life had taken care of doing justice in a way I could never have imagined, and now I just wanted to look ahead, to the future I would build with my child. My parents stayed for a week, helping to prepare the small baby's room, advising me on caring for newborns, reconnecting with me after months of forced separation. When they left, promising to return as soon as the baby was born, I felt strengthened, ready for the next chapter of my life. And that chapter came sooner than I expected. In the early morning of December 12th, 1963, I woke up with a sharp pain that crossed my belly like lightning. My water had broken, soaking the bed sheets. The baby was coming, almost 3 weeks earlier than expected. Aunt Martha, always alert even during sleep, heard my muffled groan and ran to my room. Seeing the situation, she didn't hesitate for a second. "I'll call Mrs. Sarah," she said, already putting on a coat over her nightgown. "Breathe deeply and try to stay calm." Easy to say, impossible to do. The contractions increased in intensity and frequency, making me double over in pain. Fear mixed with anticipation, anxiety with the primordial instinct awakening in my body. It was time to bring my child into the world. Mrs. Sarah arrived in record time, bringing her midwife's bag and a tranquility that only years of experience can give. She examined me with gentle hands, assured me that everything was progressing normally, and began to prepare the room for delivery. "It will be quick," she predicted with a confident smile. "This baby is in a hurry to meet the brave mother it has." The following hours were a fog of pain, sweat, and determination. I clung to Aunt Martha's hands as if they were my only connection to reality, while my body worked on the ancient miracle of bringing a new life into the world. When the sun was beginning to rise, tinting the Pittsburgh sky with shades of pink and gold, I heard the most beautiful cry that would ever sound to my ears. My baby had arrived. A small but perfect girl, with a dark down covering her head and surprisingly strong lungs for someone so tiny. "A warrior like her mother," commented Mrs. Sarah, placing the small bundle in my trembling arms. I looked at that little red, wrinkled face, at the little eyes that opened timidly to the world, and felt such overwhelming love that I could hardly breathe. It was as if the entire universe had condensed into that tiny being, as if nothing else mattered beyond protecting and loving that creature. "Claire," I whispered, tears streaming freely down my face. "Your name is Claire." I chose this name not only for the clarity she brought to my life, but also because it meant purity, new beginning, light after darkness. My little Claire had been born in freedom, far from the shadows of the past that had tormented me so much. The first months of motherhood were a roller coaster of emotions and discoveries. The sleepless nights, the constant doubts, the fatigue that seemed to permeate every cell of my body, but also the indescribable joy of seeing the first smile, of hearing the first coo, of feeling the grip of that tiny hand around my finger. Aunt Martha was my guardian angel during this period. She took care of Claire when I needed to rest. She prepared nutritious meals so my milk would be abundant. She took on household chores so I could focus on regaining my strength and caring for the baby. My parents came to meet their granddaughter as soon as they received the news of her birth. They brought gifts, love, and also little Michael, Beatrice's son, who was now 6 months old. Seeing the two babies side by side, cousins who looked more like siblings, both with features that resembled James, was a bittersweet experience. They will never know the truth, we decided together. My parents and I. They would grow up knowing only that they were cousins, that their parents couldn't raise them for different reasons. They would never know they had the same father, that they were fruits of a story of betrayal and abandonment. It was a merciful lie, a necessary omission to protect two innocent children from the weight of a past they didn't choose. As Claire grew, becoming a happy and curious baby, my work with sewing also expanded. What had begun as small repairs to help with expenses transformed into a promising business. My ability to create elegant dresses with impeccable finishes spread through the small city. Soon, the women of Pittsburgh and surroundings began to seek me out for special occasions. Wedding dresses, outfits for graduations, clothes for important parties. I worked mainly during Claire's naps, taking advantage of every available minute. The sewing machine that Aunt Martha had lent me was replaced by a new one, bought with money I managed to save. I installed a small workshop in the back room with a cutting table, mannequin, shelves for fabrics and notions. In 1964, with Claire turning 1, I made a bold decision. I rented a small commercial space in the center of the city. It wasn't anything grand, just a modest space with a storefront, improvised fitting room, and service counter. But it was mine, the first concrete step in building a new life. Wilson Atelier. That's how I baptized my small business, with a simple hand-painted sign. Aunt Martha took care of Claire while I attended to customers during the day. At night, I took work home, sewing until late, often with my daughter sleeping peacefully in the crib next to the sewing table. It was a hard life, of constant work and financial worries, nothing compared to the luxury I knew as James's wife. But there was a deep satisfaction in each completed dress, in each satisfied customer, in each dollar earned with my own effort. 1965 brought news that again changed the course of my story. One of my customers, owner of a small clothing store in Philadelphia, saw a party dress I had created for her niece and was impressed with the quality. "You have talent, Dorothy," she said, carefully observing the finishing details. "Have you ever thought about creating your own line? I'm sure it would sell well in my store." That casual conversation planted a seed that would germinate in the following years. I began to design my own models in addition to fulfilling specific orders. I invested in better fabrics and distinctive trimmings. Gradually, the Dorothy Wilson brand began to gain recognition beyond the borders of Pittsburgh. In 1966, I hired my first employee, Doris, a young widow with a skill for sewing and a desperate need for work. I taught her everything I knew, and together we managed to significantly increase the atelier's production. Claire, now almost 3, was growing like a wildflower, strong, vibrant, full of life. She was a smart girl who talked non-stop and showed from an early age a taste for clothes and fabrics. She spent hours playing with colorful scraps, creating dresses for her dolls, imitating me in gestures and manners. "She has your determination," commented Aunt Martha one afternoon, watching Claire patiently assemble a puzzle too complex for her age. And thank God, nothing of that man. It was true. Physically, Claire had some of James's features, the shape of the eyes, the tone of her hair, but in essence, in spirit, it was as if she were only my daughter, shaped by the love and values I strive to transmit since her birth. In 1968, I received news that left me in a state of shock. A letter from my mother informed me that Beatrice had returned to Millerville alone, sick, without money. James had abandoned her in Mexico, fleeing with another woman and taking all the money they had managed to save. "She is unrecognizable, Dorothy," wrote my mother. "Thin, aged, with the empty eyes of someone who has lost everything, not just material goods, but also dignity, hope. She asks about you, about Claire, about the son she abandoned. I don't know what to tell her." I read that letter countless times, trying to organize the turmoil of emotions that invaded me. Anger, compassion, a bittersweet sense of justice being done. Beatrice had reaped exactly what she had sown: betrayal, abandonment, suffering. Part of me wanted to ignore her return, let her face the consequences of her choices alone. But another part, perhaps the one Claire had awakened in me, could see beyond the anger. Beatrice was my sister, my blood. She had terribly erred, but had also been a victim of her own naivete, of the manipulation of a man without scruples. After days of reflection, I responded to my mother's letter. "Tell Beatrice she can come visit me when she feels better. I don't promise immediate forgiveness, but I promise to listen to what she has to say." 2 weeks later, an unrecognizable Beatrice descended at the Pittsburgh train station. The beauty that had always been her trademark had disappeared, giving way to a prematurely aged woman with deep wrinkles around her eyes, lusterless hair, shoulders curved by the weight of her own mistakes. Our reunion was tense, loaded with contradictory emotions. I took her home, where Aunt Martha received her with surprising gentleness, considering she knew the whole story of the betrayal. Claire, curious as always, observed that unknown aunt with attentive eyes, without shyness. "You look sad," she commented with the brutal honesty that only children possess. "Do you want to play with me? Playing always makes people happy." It was that innocent comment that broke the tension. Beatrice cried for the first time since she had arrived, not calculated tears to cause pity, but a genuine, deep, purifying cry. Between sobs, she told her story. How James had seduced her with promises of eternal love, how he had convinced her to abandon everything and everyone to flee together, how he had mistreated her in Mexico and finally abandoned her, leaving her without money, without documents, with nothing but the clothes on her back. "I don't expect your forgiveness, Dorothy," she said when she finally managed to calm down. "I know what I did is unforgivable. I just wanted you to know that I regret it every day, that I pay for my mistake every minute, with every breath." I didn't respond immediately. Forgiveness is not something granted with easy words, especially for wounds so deep. But I offered what I could at that moment: a place to stay, a chance for reconstruction. "You can stay with us for now," I said, surprising myself with the offer. "We have a small room in the back that you can use. In exchange, you'll help at the atelier. We'll see how things develop over time." That's how Beatrice became part of our lives again. At first, she worked only cleaning the atelier, organizing fabrics, answering the phone. Gradually, as she demonstrated reliability, I began to teach her to sew. To my surprise, she had a natural talent for drawing. She could capture on paper the models I described, giving them life with precise strokes and creative details. Our relationship was rebuilt slowly, brick by brick. We didn't return to being the carefree sisters of childhood. There were too many scars for that. But we formed a new connection based not just on the blood we shared, but on the mutual respect that grew each day. The years passed at an accelerated pace. 1970 arrived, bringing expansion for Wilson Atelier, which now occupied an entire house in the center of Pittsburgh. We had 5 permanent employees, in addition to seamstresses who worked at home. Our clothing line was sold in boutiques in Philadelphia, New York City, and even Chicago. Claire, now 6 years old, already showed the entrepreneurial spirit she had inherited from me. She loved to stay at the atelier after school, helping to serve customers, giving surprisingly mature opinions about colors and styles. She was a happy child, secure, loved not only by me, but by Aunt Martha, by Beatrice, by the entire small community we had built around us. In 1972, I made another decision that would change our future. With the help of the local bank, I bought a small warehouse on the outskirts of the city and transformed it into a mini factory. No longer just custom-made dresses, but small-scale production of ready-to-wear pieces. Blouses, skirts, simple dresses that carried the Dorothy Wilson label to a broader audience. It was a period of intense learning. I had to familiarize myself with aspects of the business I didn't know: inventory control, payroll, taxes, delivery logistics. Many nights I spent poring over accounting books, trying to understand the numbers that would determine the success or failure of my venture. Beatrice was fundamental in this phase. Her talent for drawing had evolved into a true gift for fashion creation. It was she who developed a large part of the collections, who captured the trends, who translated onto paper the ideas that bubbled in our minds. "We make a good team, don't we?" she commented one night as we worked on the summer collection. Who would have thought after everything? I looked at my sister, no longer the dazzling beauty of yesteryear, but a mature woman with expression lines that spoke of pain and growth. I thought about our journey, the twists life had imposed on us, the choices we had made, some terrible, others redemptive. "Yes," I replied, feeling a peace that took years to arrive. "We make a good team." And so, brick by brick, day after day, I built what many would call an empire. Not with inheritance, not with privileges, not with dishonest shortcuts, but with hard work, clear vision, and a determination that even I didn't know I possessed until I was forced to discover it. The simple girl from the grocery store, who once dreamed of being a teacher and ended up becoming a trophy wife to a rich man, had transformed into a respected businesswoman, dedicated mother, a woman complete in herself. And the best was yet to come. The 70s represented a time of great growth for the business and for my small family. Claire grew up healthy and brilliant, standing out at school not just in grades, but also in the natural leadership she exercised among her peers. My daughter had a magnetic personality, a perfect blend of sweetness and determination that filled me with pride. In 1975, when Claire turned 12, I made an important decision. It was time for us to move to a larger city, where she would have access to better schools and our clothing line could reach new markets. After much research and some reconnaissance trips, I chose Boston as our new home. The farewell to Pittsburgh was painful. The small city had welcomed me when I had nothing but hope and fear. Each cobblestone street, each church held memories of my years of reconstruction. Aunt Martha, now elderly but still lucid and strong, decided to come with us. "My place is with you," she said simply. "Here I only have walls and old furniture. You are my family." Beatrice also accompanied us. Our relationship, though never returning to what it was in childhood, had transformed into a solid partnership based on mutual respect and the shared love for Claire, who affectionately called her Aunt B and loved her stories and drawings. In Boston, I rented a larger warehouse in the industrial area and transferred production there. We bought a comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood, with enough space for all of us, including an office where Beatrice and I could work on new collections. The first months in the Massachusetts capital were of intense adaptation. The scale was different. More customers, more suppliers, more employees to manage. The market was also more competitive, with established brands disputing the same audience I aimed to conquer. But the Wilson name already carried weight, a reputation for quality and elegance that opened doors for me. Soon we established partnerships with the main department stores in the city. Our line of women's clothing, which blended sophistication with practicality, found great acceptance among modern women of the time, those who, like me, needed to balance work, family, and personal life. In 1976, we took another bold step. We opened our first owned store in the commercial heart of Boston, an elegant space with large windows and comfortable fitting rooms. Dorothy Wilson, fashion for real women, was the slogan Beatrice created, perfectly capturing the essence of what we sought to offer. It was during this period that Claire began to show real interest in the business. At 13, she spent hours in the store after school, observing, learning, absorbing every detail of the operation. She had a keen eye for trends and a natural empathy with customers. "Mom, that lady won't like this model. It doesn't match the way she walks," she whispered to me once about a customer who was trying on a dress. Claire was right. Minutes later, the woman returned the piece to the hanger with a dissatisfied expression. In 1978, I received news that shook our family. Aunt Martha had been diagnosed with advanced cancer. The doctors gave her a few months to live. That extraordinary woman who had welcomed me when I had nothing, who had helped raise Claire with so much love, who had been more of a mother to me than my own mother in many moments, was leaving us. "Don't cry for me, child," she said when she saw me crying beside her bed. "I've lived a full life. I've seen you transform from a frightened young woman into a powerful woman. I've seen Claire grow strong and healthy. What more could I ask for?" Aunt Martha departed peacefully on an October afternoon, holding mine and Claire's hands, with Beatrice sitting at the foot of the bed. Her last breath was accompanied by a gentle smile, as if she were glimpsing something beautiful, beyond our understanding. The pain of her departure was profound, but there was also immense gratitude for everything she had represented in our lives. In her honor, I created a scholarship for young seamstresses, ensuring that her legacy of generosity and teaching would continue. Life went on. The decade of the 80s brought new challenges and opportunities. Claire, now a young woman, decided to study business administration at the University of Massachusetts, determined to apply formal knowledge to the family business. Beatrice developed a children's fashion line that became an unexpected success, expanding our reach in the market even further. By 1985, Dorothy Wilson Apparel was already a nationally recognized brand, with 3 owned stores and presence in more than 50 retail outlets across America. We had 120 direct employees and a network of seamstresses who worked from home, many of them women in situations similar to what I had faced: single mothers, widows, women who needed to rebuild their lives after abusive relationships. It was in that year, at the height of our success, that the past knocked on our door unexpectedly. I was at the company headquarters reviewing the winter collection with Beatrice when my secretary entered with a concerned expression. "Mrs. Wilson, there's a man in reception insisting on speaking with you. He says it's a very important personal matter. He looks ill. He wouldn't give his name, but he left this for you." She handed me a small gold brooch with a sapphire in the center. A piece of jewelry I knew very well, which had belonged to the Harrison family for generations, which James had given me on the day of our engagement. My heart raced. After 22 years, James had found me. Beatrice paled upon seeing the brooch, recognizing it instantly. "You don't need to see him," she said, holding my hand tightly. "We can send him away, call security if necessary." I took a deep breath, feeling a strange calm wash over me. The fear I once felt for that man had disappeared long ago, replaced by an almost complete indifference. He no longer had power over me, over my happiness, over my life. I didn't respond, just stood up. "I'm going to see him. I need to close this chapter once and for all." In the reception area, I barely recognized the man sitting in the waiting chair. Of the 22 years that had passed, it looked like 40 had left their marks on him. Completely white and thinning hair, deeply wrinkled face, body curved like a dried branch. Only his eyes, those dark eyes that once made me dream, retained something of the James I had known. He tried to stand when he saw me, but his fragile legs gave way, forcing him to lean on the cane he carried. "Dorothy," he murmured, his voice trembling, barely audible. "I finally found you." I signaled for him to follow me to my private office, where we could talk without the curiosity of the employees. He walked with difficulty, each step seeming a monumental effort. When we were alone, I faced him directly. "What do you want, James? After all these years, why seek me out now?" He lowered his eyes. The arrogance that had once been his trademark was completely absent. "I'm dying, Dorothy. Liver cancer, terminal stage. The doctors gave me 3 months at most." I didn't feel the perverse satisfaction I might once have imagined at such news, just a slight sadness for human misery, for the fragility that equals us all in the end. "I'm sorry," I replied with sincerity, "but I still don't understand why you came to find me." James took from his pocket a yellowed photograph, a newspaper clipping where I appeared next to Claire, now a teenager, in a report about women entrepreneurs. "Our daughter," he said, caressing the image with trembling fingers. "She's beautiful, intelligent too, from what the article says. Helps you manage the business." "My daughter," I corrected firmly. "Claire is my daughter." "You might have contributed your DNA, but you were never a father to her in any sense that mattered." He nodded, accepting the harsh truth without protest. "You're right. I don't deserve to call her mine. I don't deserve anything from either of you." He paused, breathing with difficulty. "I didn't come to ask for forgiveness, Dorothy. I know what I did is unforgivable. I just came to say that I'm proud of what you built, of what you became, despite me, not because of me." His words caught me by surprise. The James I knew would never admit a mistake, would never recognize another person's merit, especially a woman's. "What happened to you?" I asked, genuinely curious. A bitter smile contorted his dry lips. "I lost everything. The money I took from the States ran out faster than I imagined. I tried some businesses in Mexico, then in Argentina. All failed. Beatrice left me when the money ran out. Or rather, I kicked her out when I found a younger, richer woman." He shook his head as if he didn't recognize the person he was talking about. "I followed the same pattern for years. Deceive, use, discard, until my health began to fail and I found myself alone, with no one who cared whether I lived or died. I listened to his account in silence, seeing in that destroyed man the natural result of a life built on lies and selfishness. There was no satisfaction in his misfortune, just the realization that we reap exactly what we sow. "Why did you come back to the United States?" I finally asked. "To die at home," he answered simply, "and to try to correct at least one of the many mistakes I made. You know I had another son with Beatrice?" I nodded. "Michael. My parents raised him after Beatrice ran away with you." "Yes, Michael." His eyes filled with tears. "Another son I abandoned, another life I ruined before it even began. I tried to find him too, but your parents, our in-laws, have already passed away, and no one in Millerville knows where the young man went." "He's well," I informed him, seeing the genuine interest in his eyes. "He grew up strong, studied engineering, got married, has 2 small children. Beatrice has maintained contact with him for some years." James absorbed the information, with a mixture of relief and regret. "That's good. I'm glad he had a better life than he could have had with me." He paused, gathering courage. "Dorothy, I'm not asking to meet Claire. I know I don't have that right. I just wanted to know if she knows about me, if she knows who her father is." It was a question I had expected, for which I had prepared over the years. Claire had naturally grown up asking questions about her father. From an early age, I told her a simplified version of the truth, that her father and I separated before she was born, that he went away to another country and didn't maintain contact. As she grew, I added more details, always dosing the truth according to her maturity. At 18, when she insisted on knowing the whole story, I told her everything: the betrayal, the humiliation, the escape, the struggle to survive alone with her in my belly. Claire listened to everything in silence, occasionally holding my hand when emotion made it difficult to continue. "She knows," I answered James. "She knows everything about you, about us, about the past. Claire is a strong woman, capable of handling the truth, no matter how painful it may be." He accepted that like someone receiving a just but painful sentence. "I understand. Thank you for being honest with her." He stood up with difficulty, leaning on his cane. "I won't take any more of your time, Dorothy. I just wanted to see you one last time, to know about your daughter." As he turned to leave, a question arose in my mind, one I never thought I would ask. "Where are you staying, James? Here in Boston?" He seemed surprised by my interest. "In a cheap inn near the bus station. It's what I can afford now." At that moment, looking at that broken man who had once been the center of my universe, I felt something unexpected. Compassion, not for him specifically, but for the human condition, for the fragility that equals us all in the end. "I can't offer forgiveness," I finally said. "Some wounds are too deep, but I can offer peace. I have contacts at St. Mary's Hospital. I can ensure you receive good care in your last months." His eyes widened in shock. "Why? Why would you do this for me after everything?" "I'm not doing it for you," I replied honestly. "I'm doing it for myself, to show myself that that frightened young woman who fled Millerville 22 years ago has truly transformed into the woman I always wanted to be. Strong, yes, but also capable of compassion, even for those who don't deserve it." James lowered his head, tears streaming freely down his wrinkled face. For the first time since I had known him, I saw something genuine in him. Real shame, sincere regret, the pain of someone who finally understands the harm they caused. "Thank you," he murmured. "I don't deserve your generosity." "No, you don't," I agreed without rancor. "But that's the point of compassion, isn't it? It has nothing to do with deserving." After his departure, I spent a long time looking out the window of my office, observing the movement of the city outside. Hurried people coming and going, each carrying their own story, their own struggles, their own regrets. That night, I told Claire about the meeting with James. She listened attentively, her mature face, now at 22, the same age I was when I fled, revealing a complexity of emotions. "Do you think I should see him?" she asked finally. "Before it's too late?" I took her hands in mine, feeling the contrast between her young skin and my fingers, already marked by time and work. "That's a decision only you can make, my daughter. Not for him, but for you, for your own peace, for your own understanding of who you are and where you came from." Claire reflected for a few days. Finally, she decided to visit James at the hospital, where I had managed to have him admitted. She went alone, insisting it was something she needed to do on her own. When she returned, hours later, her eyes were red from crying, but there was a serenity in her countenance that reassured me. "How was it?" I asked softly, serving her a cup of chamomile tea that Aunt Martha always prepared in difficult moments. "Strange," she replied after a moment. "Like meeting a character from a book you read a long time ago. Recognizable, but not real, not connected to you." She paused, sipping the hot tea. "He asked for my forgiveness, said he was proud of the woman I've become, thanks to you. He showed me old photos from when you were married. It seemed like someone else's life." "And how do you feel?" Claire reflected for a moment. "At peace, I think. I realized he has no power over me, over who I am, that I can acknowledge that half my DNA comes from him without letting that define my identity. That you, Mom, were both father and mother to me, and did an extraordinary job." Her eyes filled with tears again. I told him I didn't hate him, that I hoped he would find peace, but I also made it clear that you are my only true family. I hugged my daughter tightly, feeling such intense pride that it barely fit in my chest. Claire had become a better woman than I had ever dreamed of being. Strong without being hard, compassionate without being weak, capable of facing the truth with courage and wisdom. James passed away 6 weeks later, more quickly than the doctors had predicted. Claire attended the funeral, discreetly, remaining at the back of the small chapel, which was almost empty. Beatrice also went, for reasons only she knew, perhaps seeking closure for a painful chapter of her own life. I didn't go. I had made my peace with the past long before that day, long before James reappeared in our lives. My farewell had happened in that meeting room, when I offered compassion instead of revenge, when I chose to be the person I wanted to be, not the one that bitterness could have made me. The following years brought even more growth for our business and our lives. Claire gradually took over the direction of the company, injecting new ideas, expanding to international markets, transforming Dorothy Wilson into a brand recognized beyond American borders. In 1990, at 27, she married Richard, a university economics professor she met during a lecture on female entrepreneurship. A kind, intelligent man who loved her for her strength and independence, not despite them. 2 years later, my first granddaughter was born, Martha, named in honor of the extraordinary woman who made everything possible. Holding her in my arms for the first time was like closing a perfect circle, life continuing, renewing itself, bringing new possibilities, new stories. Today, at 83, I look back and see a life that, despite stumbles and wounds, was extraordinarily blessed. I have a daughter who is my greatest pride, grandchildren who are my greatest joy, a company that carries my name and my values, and the peace of someone who knows they lived with purpose and integrity. Sometimes, on quiet nights like this, I think of that frightened young woman who fled Millerville with only the clothes on her back and a baby in her belly. I think of the cruel words that marked her so deeply. You are useless. If I could go back in time and whisper something in her ear, I would say, don't believe him. You're not useless. You're stronger than you imagine, more capable than you dream. And one day, you'll look back and see that what seemed to be the end of your story was just the painful, necessary beginning of something much greater. This is my story, my dears. A story of falls and new beginnings, of wounds and scars, of losses and gains. A story common in many aspects. How many women out there haven't faced and still face similar challenges? But also unique, as all human journeys are. If something in my journey touched your heart, if somehow my experience brought comfort or inspiration for your own struggle, then sharing it was worth every minute. Because in the end, that's what life is about. Connections, shared meanings, hands that extend across time and space to say, you are not alone. Before I say goodbye, I'd like to ask once more for you to leave your like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell to receive updates about my next stories. Each like, each subscription encourages me to continue sharing experiences that might help other people. And don't forget to tell me in the comments what you thought of my story and where you're watching from. Thank you for accompanying me this far. Leave your comments, share your own stories if you feel like it, and always remember, no matter how dark the night seems, dawn always comes, always. With all my love and gratitude, Grandma Dorothy.